This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. When a card costs 2 mana of the same color, it tends to be pretty powerful for the mana value. This is because in order to consistently have 2 mana of the same color, especially on turn 2, you need to have a substantial commitment in your mana base. Additionally, this type of card tends to have an extra color appropriate effect. For example, when you pay 2 black, you often get a removal spell or a discard spell. In this video, we'll look at the best things you can get for that exact mana investment. In all, there are 95 cards that cost exactly 2 black mana, and in this video, we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. Speaking of black cards, let's talk about Black Friday. In particular, Into the AM's ongoing Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale. Into the AM is the sponsor for this video, and they also sponsored a video when this sale kicked off. Now I want to remind you about it since it ends just a few days on December 5th. Into the AM is a great apparel company, and I'm always really excited to share their great products with you. This year, they've launched a bunch of new products, including outerwear and warm weather clothing, like the black crewneck sweater I'm wearing right now. It's super comfortable and is definitely doing a good job of keeping me warm during the colder months. It also comes in lots of other great colors. If you're interested in buying some of their offerings, it's a great time to do it because their extended Black Friday and Cyber Monday sale is ongoing until December 5th, and it's the biggest sale of the year. You can get up to 60% off site-wide, and if you use my link in the description, you'll even get an additional 10% off. It's a great time to get some holiday gifts for others or something awesome for yourself. Alright, let's get back to the video. Here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. At number 10, it's Smallpox. It's a sorcery, and each player loses 1 life, discards a card, sacrifices a creature, and sacrifices a land. This is the kind of effect you'd expect from a double black card. It hurts you, makes people discard, and makes people sacrifice creatures. Those are all very classical black effects. And Smallpox sure gives you a lot for your investment. I mean, it's a 2 mana spell that can basically destroy a creature, destroy a land, and make your opponent discard. Of course, it's symmetrical, but it's always been played in decks that can overcome this symmetry. For example, in Standard, it was played in really discard-focused decks with very low curves. These black-green The Rack decks combine Smallpox with lots of other discard effects, and discard tends to get even better when you have a critical mass of it, since you can really completely disarm your opponent, and The Rack can punish them for it. The deck also had a very low curve, so it could afford to lose some of its own lands, and it also used 2 great creatures who were perfect for the deck: Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant. Tarmogoyf grows when you make your opponent discard and sacrifice lands, and Dark Confidant helps you overcome the fact that sometimes you make yourself discard. This has been the style of deck that Smallpox has been played in other formats over the years too. In Modern, it's been played in the so-called 8-Rack deck, which also uses Shrieking Affliction alongside the Rack, and it's also been played in rackless black control decks in the format, and in Legacy it's played in the eponymous Pox deck. Smallpox is going to continue to put up top 8s in both Modern and Legacy, and it's got a chance to move up the list, although it is pretty stacked. At number 9, it's Gifted Aetherborn. It's a 2/3 with Death Touch and Lifelink. That's a simple design, but like Smallpox, it really checks the boxes of what a double black card should be. It has 2 of the color's most prominent keyword abilities, and 1 of the color's most prominent creature types, Vampire. And the total package is a pretty powerful card. Those are both great keywords to have on an above-rate creature. Death Touch means it can trade with absolutely anything, and because it has Lifelink, it's going to gain you life in the process, and that's kind of the fail case. In an ideal world, you can rumble with the Aetherborn and take advantage of its stat line while putting the race out of reach with Lifelink. While it was in Standard, it was played largely in mid-range decks, but most of its points have come in Pioneer, where it's been regularly played since the format was created in 2019. There, it's been played in Mono Black and Rakdos aggro and mid-range decks in the format. It's had a pretty good 2024 too, as a result of the rise of decks using Sorin Imperious Bloodlord. While the plan A for that vampire-loving planeswalker was to cheat a big scary vampire into play, if you didn't have that going on, you could buff the Aetherborn, which itself is pretty powerful. Sorin ultimately got banned in Pioneer, of course, and that has slowed the Aetherborn down, although it's still putting up points in Rakdos mid-range decks in the format. It's likely to gain more top 8s in the future. At number 8, it's Vampire Hexmage. It's a 2/1 with first strike, and you can sacrifice it to remove all counters from target permanent. The Hexmage is actually kind of weird for a double black card. It's not a color that gets first strike all that often, and while removing counters is a small mechanical theme within the color, it's certainly not one of the most prominent ones. Anyway, while the Hexmage was definitely printed as a card to hate on decks that are reliant on counters, it also accidentally unlocked an incredibly strong combo that has been viable in multiple formats. When combined with Dark Depths, a land that enters with 20 ice counters and gives you a 20/20 indestructible flyer when the last counter is removed, you could get that counter in the extreme early game by using the Hexmage to remove all the ice counters at once. Decks with this combo were first successful in Extended, so much so that when Modern was created as the format that replaced Extended, Dark Depths got banned and it's remained banned in the format today. Legacy is where Dark Depths decks have thrived the most, and the recent introduction of battles, and especially Invasion of Ikoria, has led to a resurgence in the Hexmage being played in the format. You can use the Hexmage to remove all the counters from the battle, which gives you a second way to put a huge creature into play early. While an 8/8 isn't nearly as scary as Merit Lage, the battle side of Invasion of Ikoria can actually tutor up the Hexmage, effectively making it a one-card combo. This combo is also used in some modern decks. Vampire Hexmage is going to continue to put up top 8s in both Modern and Legacy going forward. At number 7, it's Break the Ice. It's a sorcery that destroys target land that is snow or could produce colorless mana. You can overload it for 4 generic and 2 black, in which case it destroys each land that is snow or could produce colorless mana. While destroying lands isn't something we see Black do a ton of these days, it did used to be a significant part of Black's color pie, with the most notable Black land destruction spell being Sinkhole, and Break the Ice is basically a fixed version of that powerful land destruction spell. Notably, Sinkhole isn't actually on this list because it only has 17 points. This is because it hasn't actually seen anything more than moderate competitive play over the years, not even when it was legal in the first few years of Magic, and these days it doesn't see much play in the 2 formats it is legal in, Legacy and Vintage. This is mostly because those formats have access to free colorless land destruction in the form of Wasteland and Strip Mine. It's also important to note it's banned in Pauper, otherwise it would be played there too. Break the Ice's success is evidence of just how powerful Sinkhole is, since it's largely a powered-down version of it, and it sees a ton of play in Modern. It was printed in 2021 in Modern Horizons 2, which means Modern, Legacy, and Vintage are the only formats it's legal in, and it's been a heavy sideboard card in the format, because there are many decks reliant on lands that Break the Ice can destroy. This is most notable in Tron decks, which try to assemble the 3 Urza's Tron lands that can produce 7 mana when they're all in play. Break the Ice lets you break up the Tron before it ever happens, and even if they get it assembled, you can sometimes annihilate it entirely by overloading Break the Ice. Break the Ice is going to continue to be an essential sideboard card in Modern, so it's likely to put up more top 8s in the future. At number 6, it's Sign in Blood. It's a sorcery that makes target player draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Paying life to draw cards is one of the most black effects in Magic, and this does it at a really good rate. 2 mana to draw 2 cards just isn't something you see a whole lot, even in blue these days. It's also kind of nice that you can use it when your opponent is at 2 or less life to win the game, though that's certainly a corner case. It's done the most work in Standard, partly a result of lots of reprints, and each of those appearances in the format it was played more in control decks than in aggro decks, but it isn't unheard of for aggro decks to be packing a few of them either. It's also been played in Pioneer and Modern mono-black control, and it's still seeing a bit of play in Pioneer, but it's also not super active. It's resting on its laurels more than the cards that are behind it on this list, so it's likely to lose some ground going forward. At number 5, it's Bile Blight. An instant that gives target creature and all other creatures with the same name as that creature -3/-3 until end of turn. 2 mana for -3/-3 is a decent removal spell, especially in Standard, and having the upside to kill multiple creatures for that cost is pretty sweet. Destroying multiples of an actual creature card is good, but you can also wipe out a bunch of creature tokens, which is sometimes really what you need. Bile Blight was a fixture in control decks the entire time it was in Standard, and while it's seen a little bit of play in Pioneer, it hasn't put up any top 8 since 2019. While it does have an impressive score now, it is inevitable that it'll slip down the list in the future. At number 4, it's Grasp of Darkness. It's an instant that gives -4/-4 to target creature until end of turn. I mentioned a moment ago that -3/-3 for 2 plays pretty well. Well, -4/-4 plays even better. And while it doesn't have the additional upside of Bio Blight, Grasp's ability to trade way up and kill most creatures for only 2 mana is great. Much like Bio Blight, it's built up most of its score in Standard, where it was pretty heavily played on 2 different occasions. It was also a more significant player in Pioneer than Bio Blight ever was, although it hasn't put up any top 8s in that format since 2020, and it's been inactive overall since then too. So, like Bio Blight, it's likely that Grasp slowly fades from the list, as formats with larger card pools simply have access to better removal, although it's not impossible for either of them to get a Standard reprint, in which case I can pretty much guarantee they'll see significant play. At number 3, it's Dauthi Voidwalker. It's a 3/2 with Shadow, which means it can only block or be blocked by other creatures with Shadow, and if a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you instead exile that card with a Void counter on it. You can tap and sacrifice the Voidwalker and choose one of those exiled cards, and you can play it without paying its mana cost. So, not only does it hit hard as a nigh unblockable 2-drop, it also offers one-sided graveyard hate, and it can also let you steal your opponent's cards, and those last 2 things are very typical black effects. The Voidwalker is from Modern Horizons 2, which means the only 60-card formats it's ever been legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, but it's seen significant play in all 3, and a ton of play in both Modern and Legacy. It's been the most successful in Modern, a format with lots of graveyard decks, and it's been particularly good in Rakdos scam decks. These decks look to abuse creatures with sacrifice effects and cards like Not Dead After All, and the Voidwalker is both good with this type of effect since you can sacrifice it and get it back while stealing an opponent's card, and it's also good against this effect, since if you have a Voidwalker in play, their creature can't be brought back by Not Dead After All. Despite the fact that scam decks have largely been eliminated from the format with a series of bans, the Voidwalker continues to see significant play, including in the aforementioned Smallpox decks. It's also widely played in Legacy, where it has all of the same utility it has in Modern, but with one important addition. It forms a 2-card combo with Helm of Obedience. The Helm has an activated ability that costs X mana, and then your opponent mills X cards, and the milling only stops when either X cards have been milled or they hit a creature card. With Voidwalker in play, none of the cards ever go to the graveyard, so a single activation of the Helm mills their entire library. That's some sweet utility to have on a card that is already incredible in many decks. It's very likely that Dauthi Voidwalker ultimately ends up the number 1 card on the list. It's gained a ton of points in a relatively short time, and is heavily played enough in both Modern and Legacy that it's going to continue to amass lots of top 8s. For now though, it is behind a couple of cards, like the number 2 card, which is Bloodghast. It's a 2/1 that can't block, and it has haste whenever your opponent has 10 or less life. If it's in your graveyard and you have a land enter the battlefield under your control, it returns directly to the battlefield. Coming back from the graveyard is a quintessentially black effect, so the gas definitely feels like a double black card, although many decks that use it never actually spend mana on it, as you can just dump it in your graveyard and play a land and get it into play for free, which is what makes this card particularly insane. Bloodghast only ever saw modest play in Standard, putting up 1 Pro Tour top 8 in a Vampire deck. Extended would be where it would first see play in the deck that has made Bloodghast a powerhouse, Dredge. You can dredge away your whole library or otherwise mill yourself and then get Bloodghast back for free. In Vintage, it isn't unusual to get multiple Bloodghasts into play as early as turn 1. Turns out free creatures are pretty good, so Bloodghast is going to continue to find success in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, although Dauthi Voidwalker is likely to pass it in the future. It's also kind of funny that Bloodghast is the exact kind of card that the Voidwalker nerfs, too. And at number 1, it's Hymn to Turok. This one probably doesn't surprise anybody, as it's probably the most iconic double black mana card in the game, and it's also arguably the best discard spell ever printed. For 2 black mana, it makes target player discard 2 cards at random. 2 mana to make your opponent discard 2 is a nice card to begin with, but the fact that this is random is what really makes it insane. It frequently causes significant disruption if you can cast it early, sometimes making your opponent miss land drops or lose their best spells. It was played in various black decks while it was in Standard, and was basically a staple between 1995 and 1996. Some of these decks even utilized the rack like we saw earlier. It was a little too powerful for Standard, with many games determined by whomever managed to cast the hymn first, and as a result it was restricted in Standard and banned in Legacy in 1996. It also saw some significant play in extended Necropotence decks between 1997 and 1998. And for about the last 15 years, the hymn has been played regularly in Legacy since it's so effective at disrupting opposing game plans. For For a long time, it was mostly being played in more aggressive decks, as you generally wanted to cast it early and hope that the extra time it buys you allows you to do lethal damage to your opponent before they can get a defense together. These days, it's actually played in very different decks, like Grixis Control and Dark Depths combo decks, as well as the Pox deck we talked about earlier. Like Sinkhole, it's banned in Pauper, so Legacy is pretty much the only place where it's going to put up points, but it's going to continue to do so at a pretty impressive rate for the foreseeable future. But Bloodghast and Dathi Voidwalker are in pretty good position to pass it at some point. So, those are the best cards that cost 2 black mana. Do you want to disrupt your opponent's hand, destroy their creatures, or play some vampires? If so, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on the over 800 other MTG top 10s, including more that look at specific mana costs, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do that by becoming a channel member or a patron. You can find ways to do those things in the description. Thanks for watching.